So we shall start things off today with a look at One False Move, in which one Ellie Knight, Billy Bob Thornton's Ray Malcolm, Cinda Williams' Leela Fantasia Walker, and Michael Beach's Lane Pluto Franklin murder 6 people while searching for a dealer's stash of coke and cash. Jim Metzler and Earl Billings are the detectives assigned to the case and soon uncover links to Star City, Arkansas, and so get in touch with the local 5-0 down there. That means talking to Bill Paxton's Sheriff Dale Hurricane Dixon, a hooting yahoo who's excited to get some real police work done, not just breaking up drunken home disputes. As it becomes clear that the perps are indeed headed that way, Fantasia having grown up in these parts, the LA detectives head out to Star City to lay a trap. However, there may be more to our sheriff than there appears to be on the surface, which admittedly would not be hard, and his history with Fantasia provides what I'm sure was intended as some complicating texture to the story in the final act. While One False Move isn't the worst of these neo-noirs we'll speak of today, it's not doing a lot for me, which is a shade disappointing given the reputation it appears to have gathered since its release. I don't think of any conceptual beef with the narrative or the atmosphere, which I suppose are the foundations of the genre, but a lot of the charm of a noir comes from the characters, and here there's just too many cluttering up the place to no real avail. And the one that is focused on, I do not buy in the slightest. Sorry, Bill, but you are the first in an episode-long repeated motif of characters I cannot take seriously in the slightest. I guess you did such a good job of slathering on the backwood hillbilly that it's too much of an ask to buy any kind of excavation of the character's depth as the film comes to an end. As for the rest of the gang, whether they come off better or worse is a matter of perspective. Most of them are giving so much less to do that it's not really the actors' faults that they come across as one-note sketches, particularly our trio of criminals that get no develop at all for the amount of runtime they consume. I believe it's Pluto that's referred to multiple times as some sort of genius, which is something very much told and not shown, and there's a similar lack of meat to the bones of everyone else, particularly disappointing in the case of Cinda Williams' character. There's an interesting story here somewhere, but for my money it takes place over the course of an hour-long conversation between the sheriff and Fantasia, and probably on a stage somewhere. As for the film, it turns out the real One False Move was watching it.
Harsh. Harsh. Well, before I... Yeah. Well, you go on then, Drew. You go on.
I don't have a lot to add to what Scott says. It starts off just... Yeah, Bill Pax is a big problem. He's this horrible racist yahoo, and he doesn't really improve from that point. He only really goes downwards, but not particularly interesting. And the other big problem I had with it is that Cinda Williams is a terrible actress. I'm trying to remember, I think I had the same issue with her in Mo Better Blues, which to the best of my recollection is the only other thing I've seen her in.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
Yeah, she travels through this film more or less switched off. Or maybe that's just the extent of her ability, but she was just a complete non-entity, as well as the character just being very unpleasant. And I feel I was supposed to feel sympathetic towards this character, you know, this terrible murderer who also abandoned her child. Like, there's nobody getting any sympathy from me in this, and like, there's no good character because the two LA cops are more just kind of there. Yeah, I don't know. The biggest disappointment for me, and you mentioned it, Scott, was Pluto, because they'd mentioned it's got something like a 150 IQ, and he always seems to be really calm and calculated one. So I just had this feeling like that they're setting him up that at the end he was going to be just, he would like kill everybody because it would let him get away and he'd have all the money on his own, because he's too cool to like lose his rag like Billy Bob Thornton does. And in the end, it's like, no, they do nothing with that character at all. He just dies. Okay. Like, he's a complete unexploded bomb. Like, why build him up like that and do nothing with it?
Yeah, I don't know why that character's there. I don't know why really the detectives from Ellie are there. They don't really serve a lot of purpose other than a point in the direction down there. There's a lot of work that I think could have been done. Let's say, that's why I think the interesting conflict there would be the sheriff and Fantasia having some kind of reckoning with what happened in the past and what happened there, and just have those two characters being get rid of the rest of them because they don't really do anything. Look, I like Billy Bob Thornton, but what does he do in this film apart from shout a bit? You know,
and yeah,
waste of film.
It's the way it's structured as well. Like, you have your final sequences with they're trying to find the house, and it's where it ends up being a shootout, which is pretty underwhelming itself. But they've created drama by them not being able to get there in time because they're relying on a 5-year-old to tell them where to go. This seems like they've already established quite clearly that the brother was lying to the police, but why not just take the adult with you and say, look, you're already in trouble, show us where they are, where the house is, you know, and but that would undercut all the drama, all the tension in that last act. So it's clearly why they did it, but it's stupid. You're relying on a 5-year-old.
There is an awful lot of, like I say, positioning of pieces and kind of build up in this film that none of which really gets paid off. And it was interesting for me to revisit it now because I'd only ever seen it once before, and it was a couple of years after it came out. And I don't remember renting it. I might have done, but I would have been sort of 14, 15 at the time, and it's not normally the sort of thing I would have been super attuned to, but I think on, it might have been on Sky or something actually, so I might have seen it on satellite TV, and it very much by word of mouth and reputation, because it's very, I mean, really sedately paced really for the most part. There are obviously, some violent scenes throughout the movie, but it's not really, it's not an action movie. It's not particularly hectically paced. It's not something that would traditionally appeal to a 14-year-old boy. Yeah. So I think I'd bought into it on the grounds of recommendation, and I remember really liking it at the time, which was so probably a very early part of my formative experience of like developing my faculties a bit more and broadening my taste beyond just stuff blowing up. And stuff being in space, which up until that point was probably about the only type of thing I was really interested in cinematically.
Stuff blowing up in space.
Well,
it's the Holy Grail, isn't it?
Well, exactly, which is why Armageddon is the Citizen Kane of our times. But so it was interesting to come back now, and I still kind of enjoyed One False Move, but I was left a little bit more perplexed by it this time round, primarily because, as you guys have pointed out, I'm not really sure there's a sense of payoff for anything. And certainly some pieces are positioned and there's a great deal of anticipation. And I don't remember the ending playing out quite as dully as it does. And then to read that this was, I think, was it Gene Siskel's favourite film of 1992?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe that was right. Yeah.
So
if IMDb trivia is to be believed, which we know it's not, but I suppose for the most part there'd be no reason to lie about that probably. So yeah, I do find it slightly perplexing. I'm maybe not as down on it as you guys, but I tell you, I find this possibly more interesting now in context as another sort of point on the graph of Billy Bob Thornton's career trajectory, because it was another of his writing efforts, and I think must have come after Sling Blade. When
it's very close in time to Sling Blade.
Was Sling Blade 91? I don't know.
Sling Blade was
Enhanced.
96. Sling Blade's afterwards. Actually.
It was when? Sorry,
it's 96.
Oh wow! Right, okay.
I think the short story, the short film, the original Sling Blade is before that, I think, but the actual feature film is 96.
Right, okay. So it'd be another sort of 4 years before we had our French fried taters. Mm-hmm. And
that's a great film.
Yes. So it's kind of interesting for me in that perspective of watching Billy Bob Thornton's career develop, but perhaps, as you guys have pointed out, in terms of writing, more interesting than perhaps his performance on screen, and notable for being another stop on his other parallel trajectory of just marrying people for 5 minutes. So, yeah, I have mixed feelings on coming back to One False Move, because it's been, I guess... Yeah, I'm guessing it's been like 25 years since I saw it. The other thing I didn't realise, because in common with a lot of the movies I think we'll talk about tonight, there's not necessarily a great deal to date it, because, noir films tend to be a relatively, timeless genre. But I don't recall it having been, or the soundtrack, or the score at least, having been composed almost entirely of offcuts from Lethal Weapon 2. There's just some really bizarre sort of like...
it is a whole lot of terrible 1980s saxophone
yes,
music.
It's
so
like,
I sat with me.
I remember this music from that time when Riggs was lamenting something. So just really weird. I wouldn't be surprised to find that the same person was involved in both scores. But yeah, not cripplingly disappointed, but one of those, and not as disappointed as I was with one film in particular on this list to revisit. But I don't.
It's the same one that I was hugely disappointed by, but we'll see.
Right. Well, I will. Yeah, I can't envisage coming back to One False Move. There's a big enough list of films I need to catch up with that, and if we go on averages, the remaining 40 odd years of my life, I probably won't get back round to One False Move again.
Yeah. Just before we move on, there's a couple of things I wanted to mention. One is simply, it was more of an article of interest, but I was surprised to see the second unit DP of this film was Janusz Kaminski.
Oh, really?
That name really stood out to me in the credits. Like, oh, okay, I can kind of see that for some of the landscape shots and stuff, maybe, if that's what he was doing.
Yeah, but you wouldn't say it's got his mark all over it.
Not ridiculous. I don't know how big the second unit was on it, how much they were doing.
Well, exactly, I suppose. And I would need to see where this sits within his career, I suppose, to make any comment on that, but that's interesting.
Yeah, the other thing is, you mentioned Gene Siskel. His partner in reviewing, Roger Ebert, also praised the film, and he said, it is a powerful directing job. He starts with an extraordinary screenplay and then finds the right tones and moods for every scene, realising it's not the plot we care about, it's the people. Like, that's quite a spectacularly poor read of that film, because the people are not interesting.
Yeah, I suppose I have thoughts about Bill Paxton. I think a lot of people, I've always felt really at odds with other people's opinion at large of Bill Paxton, which I think
pretty rubbish.
For the most part, yes. I mean, and rest his soul, because he was privy to a lot of interesting movies, but I do feel a lot of people base their opinions on his entire career on his performance as Hudson, and the fact that his performance is enjoyable. But I think that basically colours a lot of people's opinions. But I would say in this film, it kind of plays to his strengths, which is not to say that he is a low-life racist or was one in real life. But I think the sort of limitations of this character culturally, perhaps, are more in keeping with what I perceive to be Bill Paxton's narrower range of acting capability. Certainly in the roles that I've seen him in on the screen, I have no idea whatsoever whether or not his career as a stage performer perhaps yielded stronger results. But I've always felt at odds with that. But I wasn't quite as down on him in this movie as you guys were, perhaps.
Well, no, it's interesting you say that, because Scott, what's the name of that terrible Catherine Bigelow vampire film that we watched a little while ago?
I know the one. That was another film that a couple of years ago I was really disappointed to come back to. Not The Hunger.
Near Dark.
Near Dark.
That's it. Because particularly when Scott and I did our Catherine Bigelow episode, and we mentioned that, and I mentioned at the time, because I think that couldn't have been that long after he died, and I remember when he died, a lot of people were saying, oh, I really miss him, and he was great. And he wasn't. He really wasn't. And then he's particularly terrible in that film. And that's one of the more recent things that I'd seen him in, beyond like stuff I really obviously really know, like True Lies or Aliens or something.
Or so Twister. One of your favourites.
I've seen that. But so I was kind of a wee bit on edge, well, not on edge, but expecting much worse from this, and it actually kind of surprised me by not being terrible. So I think maybe it's because there's something like, he doesn't have a broad range, but this character was quite within that range, so it worked well. It's the problem actually with the film turned out to not be his performance, it was the writing. Because that character's barely written. There's no depth there at all.
Yeah, and like you say, this whole revelation about the nature of a child in the movie, although that's kind of shoehorned in as quotation marks character development, which it really isn't. It just feels a bit forced. But on the note of child, do you know the best performance in this movie was at the start of the film with the kid who was hiding in the room upstairs?
Yeah,
that was heartbreaking. I have no idea how that child, who is clearly, 4 years old or something like that, if that, was so convincingly terrified and sobbing in the corner. I'm really worried that someone threatened to beat that kid up or something to get that from them.
But I am thinking that kid had his toy stolen off him right before the camera started rolling. Or it was prodded in the side or something like that.
That punched me.
I don't imagine that's acting.
No, that punched me right in the gut at the start. I was like, oh my God, that poor kid. That was really, I thought that was really upsetting. And then I'm like, oh God, yeah, I remember this being a powerful film. Not so much. Dearie me. Shall we move on?